Welcome to Session 3, The New Normal, Effective Engagement and Service Delivery Strategies for Low-Income Fathers.
I love you!
Well, everybody, watching some of the earlier sessions like I have, you're pretty excited, I'm sure. I'm Nigel Van. I'm going to be moderating this next conversation with Kelly Little and Ron Thomas. As I say, I'm totally excited here from what we just heard in the previous sessions. And, you know, our mission with this session is to talk about the new normal, how we are adapting to providing services for fathers in this new environment that has existed for the last year or so. And we're going to look at a lot of the issues that have already been talked about. We're going to hear from these two experienced gentlemen. And so with no further ado, I would just like to ask, first of all, Ron, if you would just briefly introduce yourself, Ron. Just let the folk know a little bit about your background and a little bit about Rubicon programs.
Good afternoon, all. My name is Ron Thomas. I am the program manager of fatherhood programs. The name of our program is FACT, Fathers Advancing Communities Together. I've been working in this field for over 30 years in different modalities in regards to parents and children, the juvenile system. I've been in Rubicon for, it'll be 9 years next month. And I do this work because of personal reasons. I was a dad. I lost my child at a very early age. They were actually 19, killed in the streets. And the way that I felt to get back, because I wasn't the best father that I needed to be, and was a lot of guilt around all of that. So I decided to get into this field and to try to help others not to make the same mistakes that I made.
And just a little bit of background on Rubicon itself, Ron. I know that you know. Well, you tell me.
Well, Rubicon has been around
a few times. I know you're doing great work, but you can explain.
Yes, Nigel. Rubicon has been around almost over 45 years, and it started out just as a mental health facility, helping out folks who had some barriers dealing with their mental health and housing and that kind of thing. In I want to say around 95, we started working with the homeless population. And from there, we started working with substance abuse. And in 2012, we received the HSS grant to do fatherhood. And that is the work. That's when I came on board. An exception, this is our third cycle, to start working with fatherhood.
Great. Okay. So Kelly, tell us a little bit about your background and the work that your agency is engaged in.
First of all, Kelly Little, and here in Charlotte, North Carolina, doing work around fatherhood, been doing this work for over 26 years, multiple different capacities, in serving fathers from the mental health space to operating in child support for over 10 years, helping to bring child support, fatherhood to child support, and helping fathers to navigate complex systems like Department of Health and Human Services. The Urban Institute for Strengthening Families has been around for over 5 years. We've worked with the Department of Child Support Services as well as the Department of Health and Human Services to not only help fathers create opportunities for children, which is always at the front and center of everything we do, but more importantly, we created a family-centered approach to fatherhood so that we equitabilize the way fathers were viewed trying to dispel some of the myths and stereotypes associated with fathers as being deadbeat, when in many realities they're dead broke or not given the same options and opportunity as other parents. And so, in the best interest of children, that's our primary mission and purpose.
Wonderful. Yeah. And, you know, we were just talking before the session about what we heard in the previous session, and we're really taken by the acronym that Ricky Barr shared, BREAD, which means, let me see if I can cheat a bit here. Yeah. So BREAD means whatever you do has got to be beneficial for dads. It's got to be relational and resourceful. You've got to be encouraging of dads, meeting them where they are. You've got to be active, so you keep them involved, and you've got to be directional. I want to come back to directional later in this, but for now, I know Kelly has a similar acronym. So Kelly, I'd like you to share the acronym that you just mentioned to me.
So my acronym is GREAT. We want to help fathers be great. And so GREAT means starting off with being grounded. Fatherhood is a very emotional space. And so once we're able to ground ourselves and self-regulate, then we're able to make a good decision that's going to benefit children and families. The R stands for relevancy. We have to be relevant. And so as an organization, we have missions, we have vision, we have goals, objectives, and strategy. But we also must interact with the fathers and families we serve. So that relevance has to be both ways. And then the E is about empowerment and engagement. The more we engage and interact with these families, bringing in that relevancy and whatever issues and challenges that they need help with, the more we'll get to the end result. And then the A stands for asking questions. Something as simple as that. Many times fathers feel like they don't have a voice in the situation or circumstance. And so when we ask them questions, we're able to develop strategies. And then lastly, the T, which is taking time to build a relationship, which establishes trust. And when you do that, that's when transformation occurs. So for myself, that's what GREAT stands for.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks. Yeah. So, Ron, just talk to us a little bit about the guys who you serve in Rubicon. What are some of the main issues they come to you with, or you find with them? Oh, I think you're on mute.
One of the first issues we need to address and have to address, because the majority of our enrollees are coming from incarceration. We receive several referrals from the probation and parole departments, along with the community members, but they have these legal barriers. A lot of them don't have a work history, driver's license. Most are homeless. Those are some of the barriers that we have to address immediately upon day one. And once they get comfortable with that, we got to remember they're coming from the system. The system for some of these guys has been basically taken care of for years, on and off. We have to break that cycle and get them to understand that they need to stand up and be all they want to be to their children. So that's a struggle in the beginning, because it's all about communication. It's all about building trust. Because of their own background that they have created, and have to be accountable and take responsibility for the position that they're in.
And how do you do that? How do you build that trust?
For me, relativity. And I pass that on to my staff, about listening, talking, like Kelly just spoke about, and giving them the space to be who they are, or who they're trying to be or want to be. And it goes from there. That communication and building that healthy relationship is so important. They feel, a lot of them, that no one has ever been on their side, and it more than likely has started from home. And we have to knock down that barrier, letting them know that we are the family, and they buy into that.
Mm-hmm. And I know you've talked before about the generational trauma that a lot of the guys bring with them. Would we like to just say a little bit about that?
But generational and the culture from which they come from. A lot of the dads have watched their dads not be a good parent, and assuming that's how they're going to live their lives, or they're so angry about what had taken place as they were growing up, they resent that, but they still participate in those same negative behaviors. We have to misspell that. That generational thing, it goes back from family to family, um, where we have to break. And it's kind of difficult at times when they have come of age and to let some of those things go. I spoke with you earlier about doing some of the sessions once we get them to buy into coming into our program is talk about the thorns and roses during the session after the session is over with. And some of those thorns would be about the generational negativity that they brought into their parenting skills or lack thereof. And in the roses, we end up talking about the good things because there's always good and bad things in parenting, and you have to take the good and move forward with that and make that a teachable moment for them and their children.
Yeah, I
And
love that thorns and roses. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and let go of the thorn.
Okay, yeah. And Kelly, I'm going to ask you also, to just tell us what kind of barriers the guys that you're working with face. Is it different from Ron? And I'd like to, I know people in the audience are going to have similar things maybe, but if you'd like to add in the chat box, anybody, what's the biggest barrier that the dads that you work with face? But so Kelly, what would you add to the barriers discussion, and then how do you, along the lines of what Ron was doing, help the guys start moving forward?
I think it's the same barriers that Ron mentioned, but I will highlight one, employment. So if I made a bad choice or a bad decision historically, I served my time and it's time for me to reconnect with society, then I serve my debt. However, systems and institutions and people are not as unforgiving. And so we have to be able to help them navigate that space. In addition to that, child support is a major barrier. I don't know how many times I've been to fatherhood conference the last 20 years, and that's a huge topic. You got a child support, you have the arrears that may be at 30, 50, $75,000. I've seen $100,000. Then we have to remember the bad relationship with the co-parent, right? So that's a huge barrier as well. And then access and visitation. I'm paying child support. I haven't seen my child in over 8 years. And I can only sympathize because I can't empathize with that because I've never experienced that. And so knowing this is extremely establish and build a relationship with these men so we can help navigate that. But you begin by really having conversations and discussions that establish trust and letting them know that we understand where you're coming from and we're here to help you navigate that so we can mitigate that risk, so that we can build that relationship. And from there, you get to build a relationship with the child supports. You help them get employment by your credibility as an organization and what you've done into the community. And so now it changes the way they view other systems and institutions and allow you to truly be able to impact long-term outcomes for children, because we can't be thinking about just the one child. We have to think about 2 generations downstream.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm trying to track some of what's being said in the box. I noticed one person said that one of the barriers or needs, I guess, is for emotional support. And that brought to my mind a lot of the training sessions that I've done over the years. We'll have a panel of fathers, and I'll always ask them, what kept you in this program? What did you get from this program? And one word And I always ask the audience to, in fact, if you'd like to chime in before I give you the answer here, what would be one four-letter word that the audience think fathers would say they get from a fatherhood program? And having said that, I'm going to turn this to Ron and ask sort of how your staff do this, and I'm just going to shout out when I see the word. It's not there yet. So go ahead, Ron. How do you, there you go, love.
I was going to say, if that's what the question is, love there, you're saying it, but life. I would say life. It's kind of hard to explain to see the expression on a father's face when they finally feel they finally got it. I have a better understanding of it. And it all starts in the beginning. Enrolling to a fatherhood program, they don't know what to expect. First of all, they come to us for employment because we do. It's one of the carrots, so to speak, that we use to in part of our recruitment plan is talk about assisting folks in getting employment and housing, if needed. And the parenting is thrown in as well, and they agree to the housing, they agree to the employment. Now we have to convince them that this is also a parenting program. And we start from there. And after a few sessions or conversations with the coaches in the office, they feel lively. They're ready to attack. They've looked at certain things that they have not been doing in their lives, and they hear about things they can be doing in their lives with their children and possibly the co-parent.
Yeah. Let's talk about COVID. Let's talk about how this, first of all, impacted the lives of the low-income men that you work with. Kelly, you want to take that first?
Yes, I was actually looking in the chat to respond.
Yes.
Can I respond to a question real quick?
Yes, please do. Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
Vince from Toronto asked a question around, did he hear me correctly around somebody paying child support for 8 years and never seeing their child? And that's not only has it happened and does it happen, but it happens frequently in different places. And so being able to share with them how to navigate that situation and who are the appropriate people to be able to get back into your child's life. And so the OCS, the Office of Child Support Enforcement, which is the federal arm of child support, has put some very proactive things in place so that we are engaging, but every different location does child support differently. And so you have to establish that relationship. One of the contracts that I work on is with child support. And so they had money from a waiver, and we helped them by going through access and visitation, because child support and custody and visitation is two different things. And we have to go the appropriate route so that we can thus give them the information they need to establish that relationship. And so in doing that, that in itself helps you to build relationship with these fathers, because now they realize that we are not against them. And when I say we, I'm speaking even to child support in this case, because they're operating in the best interest of children. And so just knowing that they put money up to ensure that fathers do have an opportunity to engage with their children speaks to what some agencies are doing. The challenge sometimes is what the legislation is in your respective area, and helping them to navigate that in a way that helps them get their needs met. So I wanted to make sure he knew and understood that.
Sure. Yeah, no, in fact, if you listen to the earlier session on research, Armand Perry shared how, a lot of guys who owe child support have found it harder to get their child support order modified, the amount of the order modified since COVID. So the guys you work with, what kind of implications did COVID have for their situation?
Well, I think it had some significant implications, because even the court system slowed down in this process. Now, one of the benefits for them, I was an administrator at child support. So I ran the office. I knew how to navigate that situation, and I can give them that information. Not only that, I've worked with NFI, and when I brought fatherhood to child support over 10 years ago, 13 years ago, when I was working there, I brought it in so that fathers looked at us differently. But then more importantly, I did quarterly non-custodial parent orientations, and I didn't call them non-custodial parents because most fathers don't like that. And I know why they don't like it. So you talk to them like they're human beings, and you will watch them elevate and want to be involved and engaged in their child's lives. But it's important to help them not only understand child support, but the social services system. And to Ron's point, when you speak to some of the things that grandparents may have to go through who may be raising a child, because may either a parent lost, that lost a parent, or in some cases, maybe a parent is incarcerated. And so we need to engage men from a different perspective to use the village approach to help these people get the support that they need.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm watching the chat box again. There's some very interesting stuff going on. So, hi, Chris Brown. What Chris just said is so true. I think if we go back to the beginning of our conversation and how you meet guys, when guys come in that they're angry, right? You've got to let them vent that, but then you've really got to be able to guide them down the path. And one way is in terms of child support, you do this, you've got to be able to help navigate the system, even if you haven't got a very good relationship with your local child support office. You've got to work on that and learn more. But let's if I can, let's move on to co-parenting a little bit. So Ron, in terms of COVID, what was the impact of COVID on the co-parenting situation of some of the dads you work with? Were they able to see their kids? Did it make it worse? What was the relationship like with the other parent?
To use some of the stuff that Kelly just mentioned, with the courts being closed down, there were court orders that were broken, and was nothing that the co-parent could do about it. There was the number increases percentage-wise of domestic violence. Co-parents were using children as pawns against the other co-parent, which made the co-parent who was enrolled in our program very angry, on top of them losing their jobs. But we were able to use, all the staff is skilled at motivational interviewing. We use those skills and techniques to get them to understand how to deal with things in a different way. A few of them did overcome those until we were able to get started back in having our fatherhood classes back on board virtually. But it was very difficult. It was very difficult. Some was rearrested for domestic violence, and that domestic violence could look any type of way that it can. It's just not a physical thing that could occur, but it was difficult. There was other things that we had to learn and how to work with this situation. COVID put a lot of strains, or what should I say, obstacles or barriers in front of the staff in order to serve the participants the way that we needed to serve them.
Say a bit more about that and how you overcame that so you could keep working with guys.
Well, of course, I think all of us were put in a place where we had to halt and come up with different strategies on how to continue to deliver services in the community and with the existing participants in our program. So we had to take a hiatus. I believe that all grantees had to kind of strategize how we continue to reach our participants. So when we start going virtually and having the participants have getting their voice back and having a place to emote or cathartic and learn different ways how to deal with situations. That was the beginning. of them understanding that, again, no matter what someone else says, this is not your fault. Because that's how they heard it. They looked at themselves again because of the voices coming at them, telling them you screwed up again. Not looking at COVID. They found an excuse to make them feel bad or not them feel worthy of being a co-parent.
Mm-hmm. So Kelly, Ron just mentioned actually that he's a grantee, so he's one of the Office of Family Assistance grantees. What's the main funding source for your program and the work that you're engaged in?
So I have grants, but primarily a lot of agencies across North Carolina contract with me. And so because I retired from local government, social services, child support, and those entities as well. I do work with My Brother's Keeper, Charlotte, which is the first nonprofit My Brother's Keeper across the country, and just a couple of other areas right outside of Charlotte as well, contracting with the Head Starts and Healthy Starts to be able to secure funding to ensure we're able to support fathers and support young people as well. And if I can, I'd like to just really add on to when you talk about barriers and we talk about COVID, I think that's on a smaller scale, but we also must highlight and remember that from not just the pandemic, but multiple pandemics and epidemics, systemic and institutional racism, and then the repeated exposure to trauma and the fear that some males may have, all play a factor, because when you get these men psychologically or from a mental health perspective in this endemic, I'm also worried about my child. I'm also worried about the fact that I'm not working and that, to Ron's point, I may not be able to get to see my child. And so really starting off from a space of being able to ground them and then talk about meditation to help them relax and then put them in position to secure jobs because they may not have experience. And so you get folk who can work with them to be able to talk about your transferable skills, but we also can't forget, like, so on one end, you might not have the opportunity for employment, but on the other end, because let's not forget economies of scale and how some people made more money by being at home than they did going to work. So that made it a little more difficult with those who are tied to child support and expected to pay consistent and reliable child support as well. So really having those discussions and conversations around, okay, where do we go when this pandemic shifts, and how do you position yourself to get that employment so that court order doesn't come to haunt you?
Mm-hmm. And Ron, I think you've got a take on that as well, right? In terms of how to help the guys focus on the future as well as the benefits of maybe not, or the hardships of being able to work at the moment.
Well, and employment has never fixed anything. It's a beginning. And what we have to remind the fathers is that now you need to build your skill set and learning how to be a better parent. Neither one of you have been bad. You just need to learn a few other things. And that's what we really work on, Nigel. We get all the other barriers out of the way. So now this is what we need to do. And yes, we're happy and you're glad you're able to pay your child support if need be and all those kind of things. So now let's be the parent that you want to be. And that's where the challenges really come in at, because of the things that they didn't learn or didn't pay attention to or wasn't thinking it was that important. And that's where we go from there, which in the beginning was challenging, but they're so motivated to be a better person and a better dad that it works its way out. It works out fine.
So in terms of helping the guys be a better dad, one of the objectives we had for this session was to talk about the importance of helping dads be there for their kids. Do you have a way of tracking that as a program outcome so you can show, by doing what we do, that dads are more involved with their kids?
Yeah, we monitor the increase in visitation. We monitor the activities that they partake in. And one of the things that we do recognize as part of the activities, we have a cooking class where co-parent can also be in the same room with them and along with the children. And we have the father and the kids cook a meal. And we teach them how to cook this meal on a budget. So that's part of what we do and how we monitor the progress in the parent. We have activities that happen on weekends. Of course, during the COVID, it's been kind of difficult. So everything we have done has been virtual, but that still has enhanced their skills and their relationship with the children.
Oh, interesting. And actually, you made me think. The Clearinghouse. We recently published a tip sheet for dads on cooking with your kids. So that's I believe in the materials for the event today. You can download that tip sheet for dads. So I'd encourage people to do that.
We also ask them to get involved with informal payments to the co-parent or to the children. We monitor that, whether they're going out and purchasing toys or taking them to the movies and do all that. And we kind of show them the progress that they've made and some of the things that they're doing now that they weren't doing before. So
Okay. Yeah. Now, in terms of, the experiences through the pandemic and using Zoom and everything, we've all talked about the way there are advantages to that. For some guys, it can be more access, particularly if you're out in a rural area or you're in a urban area where the bus lines don't work to get you to the program on time necessarily. So it means you don't have to worry so much about getting guys in there. You've got to deal with all the technology things, and that's what everyone's been grappling with over the last year or so. But I'd like to ask each of you, how do you see the new normal? I know most people are talking about it being some kind of hybrid version. But Kelly, what does the new normal look like from the perspective of the work you're doing?
Um, and honestly, Nigel, I don't even consider it a new normal. I think you meet fathers where they are and you provide the requisite resources that they can utilize. Again, I go back to asking questions. Sometimes you have to alter your program's availability to meet the needs of father. For instance, if a father works until 7 o'clock at night, I can leverage Zoom, I can use WebEx and different platforms to be able to still provide a service when they're not able to come to the traditional one. So I think it's another tool or resource to help us to be effective and meet their needs in that moment. And I would add one other thing real quickly, because to the point, all of the fathers that come to our programs may not be lacking in skills and skill set. It may be other things. I watched many fathers who came in and who supported the program and was often acting as a senior advisor, providing words of wisdom to support those men who were coming through the program. And lastly, I'll say this, because Ron made some great points. I just want to make sure that we understand that when these fathers come to our program, the same way we're facilitating and we're teaching, if we're great facilitators, we're listening and we're learning how to elevate our program.
Absolutely. And that is one of the most important things. Yeah. If we're not listening, we're not helping. Yeah. Yeah. So, Ron, how does the new normal look for Rubicon?
I, I have the same sentiments and thoughts as Kelly. What is the new normal?
Yeah.
We plan on having a hybrid approach, especially those who have obtained employment during this process, but they still need more work and they want more work. They're able to log on at given times for folks working whatever hours there are. Our fatherhood coaches are willing to work past the normal work hours to get that done. So we will continue to do that. But it has been somewhat, and we kind of do it now, but it has been somewhat of a barrier for some. again, they're learning how to navigate through the system, learning how to be a better parent, learning how to pay bills, learning how to do all those kind of things. And then I got to go to this class. I got to do all that. And once again, we look at what's your priorities. What is the priorities right now? Yes, you've mentioned everything that's important to you. And yes, we feel they are important to you. But what do you really want to do? And again, that's motivational interviewing come in at, and we let them make those choices about how they're going to accomplish the goals they need to accomplish. And we'll take it step by step by prioritizing. I don't look at it as being a new normal. We've been doing this going on 18 months now, and it's part of our lives, part of their lives. When it was difficult last in 2020 in March, it's no longer difficult. It become part of what we do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, perhaps we need to add an F somewhere to one of those acronyms for being flexible, right? And that's certainly one of the things that a good fatherhood program does, and you got to be passionate, you got to be flexible, and yeah. And I saw somebody mentioned how do you bring faith into the work? I've certainly seen a lot of people who do this from a faith perspective, even if we can't preach when we're teaching. Would either of you like to just take that for a minute to talk about the role of faith in the work you do?
I'll take it real quick. I'll just say this. Again, when we start from a place of gratitude, give grace, and then when we get into the meditation component, it's tied to spirituality. So it's not a specific religion, it's spiritual. And so in that, many of those fathers will share their own examples of how they've used faith to be able to navigate and push through fear, difficulty, and many of those other challenges that they face. And to your point, Nigel, we don't push it in the program, but we allow it to organically help us meet those fathers where they are.
Yep, yep.
I totally agree. I
Yep.
totally agree with that. Spirituality has been very, very important to the work that we do, and getting folks to understand that because, like Kelly, you don't want to try to push any religion on anyone, but letting them know spiritually you can get there.
Mm-hmm. I do want to highlight one thing that my colleague Patrick Patterson, who we're going to hear from in a few minutes, actually, he just pointed out that listen and silent have the same letter, which is very, very cool. It reminds me of, and this is back to the point you made a little while ago, Kelly. It reminds me of one of the very best fatherhood peer support group sessions I ever sat in. I think it was actually in California, Ron. There was this guy came in and he was unloading, right? The mother of his child was not letting him see his child. He'd gone over to the house. He'd been shouting at her. She'd been shouting at him, and he'd come in and he was all worked up, right? And he came in and shared this story, and the facilitator did not respond. He just sat there, right? And then the fathers really showed me that this was a well facilitated session that had been meeting for a while. They started giving him advice. And the basic thing they were saying was, what did you expect, man? How have you treated her before? So you've got to help guys come to that recognition as well, right? This is where I want to come, and I do want to continue to ask people to put questions in there, even if we can't get to them. We will post some answers in the VCC that you've been hearing about, the virtual collaborative community. You'll hear more about that tomorrow. But we want to continue this conversation there, so we're going to encourage everybody to join us there. I just want to go back to that D of directional that we talked about before. How do you say at the end of a session, how do you help understand where guys are? So you mentioned roses and thorns. Is that something that you bring up at the end of a session, Ron?
Yes, it is. It is not where I feel that they are, is where they feel they are.
Mm-hmm.
Again, and I want them to express that. And it's not being right or wrong, or you're on the wrong track. That's where you are, and that's what we're going to work with.
Okay. So Kelly, how do you sort of help the guys stay on the path, and moving forward?
So real quick, Nigel. First of all, um, Patrick Patterson, and I want to mention him because when we navigate, and he's been in the same space as me with these fathers, many times we ask direct questions to find out where they are at, so that we don't have to use analogy sometimes, which is it's a part of the process. But then being real direct, and because we built that relationship, they're going to tell us where they're at the end of the conversation. And many times we may get a call after the class is done to be able to help them further address respective issues. And that's what, again, programs like Ryan does, because when you build that relationship, they will continue to leverage you so that they learn and navigate. The goal is, to Ryan's point earlier, don't always give them the answer, help them process and think through it so that when they return to the community, it's sustainable.
Said. Well said, Kelly. Well said.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So let me ask each of you, if you could, because, I do think one of the important things is, after you've been doing a session with fathers, you're clear, if you're the group facilitator, you're clear where you want this session to end up, but have the fathers got the same message, right? So you've got to hear from them at the end of the session. You've got to hear and then keep talking to them about what their takeaway message is from that session. Because if it's not what you intended, you need to circle back on that next time, right? Or next time you're having a one-on-one conversation. So for the benefit of the audience today, I would just like to give each of you the opportunity to leave a takeaway message. When we started this session, the three of us had an idea of where we were going to take the conversation. We haven't taken it in quite the same way, right? Because conversations flow. But if there was one thing that at the beginning of the day you wanted to leave with the audience, let me just give you each an opportunity to say that now. Whoever wants to go first.
Well, one of the things, I'll go first, Kelly, but one of the things that, which always is a teachable moment, is at the end of the session, again, what I spoke about earlier, the thorns and roses, they have the opportunity at the end of the session to talk about what they talked about and what did they get out of what they talked about. And that is the separation between the thorns and roses. And one of the things that I've learned over the years of doing this work with this contract is they really are upset, embarrassed about the thorns in their lives, which they have created. And at the end of talking about that, and some of the guys get very, very emotional, that they even acted out or said certain things during the course of their parenting. They get to the rose. Those same emotions are sometimes there, but it's in a different light. We measure that. We talk about that in a one-on-one session. And that relationship, that communication that we're having with them only enhances the opportunity for them to continue in our program. And we recognize that. We let them know that they have done well. We may incentivize them for the good work that they've done, and it keeps them coming. And again, earlier what Mr. Berry was talking about in the last session is that actually works very good with the recruitment.
Well, thanks for sharing that. Yeah. So I'm going to give the last word to Kelly. And Kelly, let me just say, when I first met you at a conference some years ago, I was very taken by what you were doing and the passion. But in the conversations we've had leading up to this, I've been so impressed by the wisdom you bring to the work. So leave us with a bit of wisdom here.
Thanks, Nigel, and likewise with you. And what I'll leave us with is, what I normally tell fathers: your past doesn't dictate your future, right? Oftentimes we're talking about we need you to be present, but being present without having presence, which is that active engagement, will never serve our children or the families. So make sure that you are being involved, and in great programs how great of a handler is, Nigel. The thing that transformed those programs, your fathers will be your testimony. I had fathers who, one of them probably had COVID. He came, he was sick as a dog at the beginning of it, but he came to the program. I got people fighting with cancer and other conditions. It is what they tell those participants who come behind them, how their experience was influenced on their journey. And so I guess my takeaway is make sure you're capturing the phenomenal work that you're doing, because you'll have the quantitative things that you've accomplished, but we forget about how important those qualitative elements are, which is a social return on investment. And when you can highlight the quantitative and the qualitative, it will speak volumes to your program, and it will draw other people to send in fathers to your program. And ultimately, all our goal is to uplift and elevate the human condition. And that's what we get to do when we get to serve more people.
One more thing, Kelly. I mean, Nigel, if you
Real
don't
quick.
mind. Kelly just mentioned something about your past is your past. Let's get into present. But one of the things that I often practice when is having a participant regurgitate that past, because if you don't let it go, it's bound to come back and haunt you later on.
Yeah, you got to deal with it. Got to deal with it.
You have to deal with it.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you both, gentlemen. It's been wonderful. I've got to give the time now to my esteemed colleague, Patrick Patterson, who's going to wrap the day up and tell us where we're going tomorrow. But again, I hope everybody can join us in the virtual collaborative community, which you'll hear more about tomorrow. And Kelly and Ron, we will be available to either directly there or to respond later to questions there. So once again, gentlemen, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom, and conversation as always to be continued.